Good morning, community. Good morning. All right. Ooh, look at that. Very good. I'll tell you what, I have really been looking forward to this series. I mean, you always look forward to Easter, but I've been really also looking forward to this series that follows up Easter. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to dive right in. And I want to start with this. Rewind a little bit, okay? Rewind a little bit a few years back when you were a kid. And I want you to think, I think most of us had stuff when we were a kid that we were really afraid of. Kind of irrational fears that we were afraid of. So go back there for a little bit. I need you to be vulnerable. I want you to be honest. Can I ask you to even raise your hand here? How many of you remember when you were a kid, you were afraid that there was something underneath your bed that was going to get you? You were just sure. Surprised you're even here today because you were just going to, right? Let's see it. Come on. There we go, yeah. How about the closet? Anybody had to have the closet closed? Mom, close the closet before you leave. Got to close the closet before you leave? Yes, that was it. So anything else? My middle son, he had this irrational fear of sharks, which is kind of random when you live in Chicago. Why are you afraid of, But I can remember as a little guy, Josh would go like, I'm not afraid of nothing, Dad, except sharks. Sharks. How about quicksand? Anybody? I was afraid of quicksand. Anybody afraid of quicksand when you were a kid? I think that was probably Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. I think it was their fault. Falling giant boulders in quicksand. I've yet to actually come upon quicksand, but I know someday, right? Someday. What about? Let me think. What else is there? How about ghosts? You're afraid of ghosts? You're like, oh, I'm sure. I heard it. Are clowns? Anybody? Creepy clowns? There you go, yes. Statistically, I saw that the creepy clowns actually are scarier, they said, than ghosts. How about anything like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, any kind of animal, anything that was kind of dressed up in a costume, kind of freak you out as a kid? Yeah, some of you got that one too? What else? What else am I missing? Help me out. What else am I missing? What else were you afraid of when we were kids? What? Spiders? Okay. Who's still afraid of spiders? Okay, see, that's not when we were kids, all right? But that's a good one. What else? What? Oh, the basement, yes. Oh, yeah, you never go in the basement, especially after it got dark, right? The basement? Yeah, anything else? Turning 30. Snakes, turning 30. Sorry, buddy. It's already happened. You've conquered your fear. Nicely done. I'll tell you, Alfred Hitchcock, the famous suspense film director, he made a living off of fear, and he said this: fear isn't so difficult to understand. After all, weren't we all frightened as children? And nothing has changed since Little Red Riding Hood faced the big bad wolf. What frightens us today is exactly the same sort of thing that frightened us yesterday. I love this next line. It's just a different wolf. The fright complex is rooted in every individual. All right, now do me a favor, fast forward. Okay, fast forward 10 years, 20 years, 30, maybe 40 or more years. Okay, what makes you afraid today? When you walk into today, it's a different wolf. And it's probably actually quite a bit scarier than a clown or quicksand. What makes you afraid? See, my hunch is that for some of us, we come in here today and somebody broke your heart along the way. And I'm not just talking to the women here. Somebody broke your heart. They rejected you. They took advantage of you. And you know what? It makes you afraid. It makes you afraid to get close to anybody. For some of us, it's the fear of failing. It feels like it's just too big. It's too risky to take something on. So you just kind of hold back and you risk nothing and you find yourself afraid, paralyzed by fear. For some of us, if we're honest, it's about money. You're afraid the money's going to run out. And other people tell you it's irrational. The math says you're okay. You're still afraid. Or maybe it's what the doctor might say. And that comes, maybe some of it comes from a family history, or maybe you don't even know where it comes from, but you're just sure that at some point in time, real soon, I'm going to get some bad news. And for us to get the most out of our time here together this morning, I want you to work with me on this. Okay, what is it? What is it that you're afraid of? What's the wolf? What's the big bad wolf in your life? Today we're beginning this brand new series. It's going to be a 4-week series called My Story. And here's what happens. We all have there's the great story of history, which is God's story. But then within God's story is our own story, my story. And many of our stories, many of the chapters are filled with things like addiction or shame or even failure, or what we're going to talk about today, fear. Much of your story has been occupied with those kind of things. And here's the good news. And this is the good news we come here to celebrate, but the good news we also come here to believe and then take out to the rest of the world. The good news is this. That is not the end of the story. That is not the story that God has for you. That is your old story. And what God wants to do, starting today, is give you a brand new story. There was a guy by the name of Apostle Paul, okay? The Apostle Paul was a guy who had God kind of like supernaturally intervened to edit his story. And here's what he says. He says this. He says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. I'm going to edit his a little bit. The old story is gone, and the new story is about to begin. Now, when you came in, you should have received one of these cards, and if you didn't, hopefully you got one from one of the ushers. We'd love for you to get one before you leave, okay? We're going to pass these out every week. On one side, it just says old story. The other side, it says new story. And you can take a pen in front of you. Go ahead and grab a pen in front of you want right now. This is not something we're going to collect. This is just for you. I have found that when you write something down, it kind of makes it so. When you say something out loud, it has more power to it. So there's probably a pen in the pen holder in front of you. If you want, go ahead and grab that pen. And I would love for you just in a phrase, as you feel prompted today, a phrase or maybe a word or two words, just, here's my old story. And then on the other side, you can write out a phrase or a word, here's my new story. And for some of you, we're actually going to give you the opportunity to, on our website, at communitychristian.org/mystory. If you want to go there, you can either tell them who you are or anonymously share your story. And our hope is that by sharing your story, it'll be an encouragement to other people on this journey as well. So let's talk about this fear thing, okay? Fear has always been a struggle for people. We all have a wolf. And it's been a struggle for even some of the most impressive, God-loving, God-following people. Like a guy like the prophet Elijah. All right? The prophet Elijah. His primary role as a prophet was to speak out against oppression, speak out against injustice, speak out against wrongs, especially when those in power would inflict those on those who didn't have as much power. So consequently, time and time again, Elijah would find himself face to face in a confrontation with King Ahab. Let me tell you a little about King Ahab. King Ahab had been the ruler of Israel for 22 years. He now had the reputation for being probably the most evil king that they'd ever had. On top of that, he was a king who totally rejected God and had started worshiping the pagan god Baal and was actually encouraging people to follow him into worshiping this pagan god Baal. That's Ahab. Then on top of that, Ahab had the queen, his wife, Jezebel. How many here? Who here is named Jezebel? Anybody? Jezebel. Don't see anybody. How many of you wish your parents would have named you Jezebel? How many of you loving parents thought when you saw your little daughter born, oh, I think I'll name her Jezebel? Anybody? No, we don't do that. You know why? Jezebel kind of is synonymous with what? Help me out. Evil, right. It's synonymous with evil. And this woman is the reason why. She was wicked. She was bad. She was evil. We don't even know her story, but we just know Jezebel. That's bad. Now, hold on to that. So you got Ahab and Elijah, right? We're going to get back to Jezebel in a little bit. You got Ahab and Elijah. They're facing off, and there's like a string of victories that Elijah has. At one point in time, he kind of confronts the king and says, listen, just to prove that God's on my side, I'm going to ask it not to rain in your country. I'm going to ask God not to make it rain. And it quit raining just like that. Not only did it quit raining, it actually stopped raining. It didn't start raining again for 3 years. That's kind of a win, right? At least for Elijah. Another time, Elijah and Ahab had kind of this divine smackdown, you might call this epic duel of my God versus your Baal. And they said, all right. Ahab went and got 450 prophets of Baal. They set up this altar that they'd sacrifice to their God. Set up an altar here. And they began to pray that God, their God, Baal, would send fire down from heaven. Send fire down from heaven. And they prayed and they prayed and they prayed. Elijah even kind of intimidated him some. He says, hey, what's the problem? Is your God not listening? There's actually one translation where, I don't know if this is how accurate, there's one translation of the Bible where they have Elijah actually saying to Ahab about the prophets of your God's not responding by sending down fire. Maybe he's busy sitting on the toilet. It's in the Bible. Okay, so there you have it. So anyway, nothing happens. So then Elijah says, okay, you know what? Your 450 prophets of Baal couldn't get it done. So he brings in all kinds of water, all kinds of water. He soaks the thing with water once, twice, 3 times, over and over again, just drenches this altar with water. And then one time he prays, say, God, send fire. And he sends fire. And God sends such an incredible fire. He sends fire, it consumes the whole altar and actually consumes everything around it and destroys the 450 prophets of Baal. Now, I could go on and on and on, but here's the deal, okay? This guy was an impressive figure, impressive character, larger than life, a guy who stood up to kings and hundreds of false prophets. Now, when that happens, though, that last incident, that infuriates Jezebel. Jezebel said, hey, you may have been messing with my husband, but now you're messing with me. And here's what Jezebel says. Jezebel sends a messenger to Elijah, and here's what she says in 19:2. She says, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them, referring to the prophets. She threatens Elijah with his life. So what does Elijah do? What do you think Elijah does? Courageous, brave prophet Elijah, victorious prophet. Here we go. Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. Kind of not what you expected, was it? Not what I expected. I mean, a guy who stood up against King Ahab and the injustices, the guy who stood up against 450 prophets of Baal, a guy who's seen miracle after miracle after miracle. I mean, that's not exactly what I expected. I don't get it. Jezebel threatens him, then he runs. Why does he do that? Well, it's a little surprising until we remember what the great theologian Alfred Hitchcock had to say. We all have a wolf, don't we? We all got a wolf. And that fright complex is rooted in every individual. And Jezebel is Elijah's wolf. And it's real. And let me say this, and I hope it doesn't sound in a hurtful way, but in this way, you're not special. You are not special in that you're afraid. We all got our stuff, no matter how big or bad we are. We all got our stuff that take up residence inside of us that make us afraid. And there's reasons to be afraid. There's reason to be afraid. I mean, people do use one another. Marriages do fail. Kids do rebel and do crazy stuff. Businesses collapse. Jobs get lost. Lab reports do come back with bad news. There are real reasons to be afraid. And when we feel that fear and it begins to overwhelm us, we just want to escape. We just want to get away. We want to run. And that's exactly what Elijah did because he's afraid. And he runs for his life. And so after a day after running into the wilderness, he finds some shade under a shade tree, and he finally declares there, he says, you know what? I've had enough. He just says, look at there. He just says, I have had enough, Lord. I've had enough. Any of you feel that way? Any of you kind of, you got yourself out of bed, but you got here and you're going like, but other than that, God, man, I just feel enough. It's enough. I've had enough. And Elijah feels that way. And he prays that he might die. I mean, discouragement sets in that quickly. And look what he does next. I've had enough, Lord. I want to be over with this thing. Look what he does next. It says this. Then he went into a cave. Went into a cave. The cave, interesting enough, if you kind of read between the lines of the Bible, is actually a cave on the side of Mount Horeb. Now, Mount Horeb was a really important place in God's story. Because in God's story, this is the same place where Moses had encountered the burning bush. Mount Horeb was the same place where the children of Israel, they received the 10 Commandments straight from God. And so now Elijah's in this very important place in God's story, and what is about to happen next is one of the most remarkable scenes in all of Scripture. God says to Elijah, he says this, he says, you go out and stand on the mountain because I'm about to show myself. I'm about to pass by. And here's what happens after that. It says, then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After that, after the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. This is going to be important later on. After the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak up over his face, and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. And as he stood out at the mouth of the cave, he hears God whisper to him, into that cave, Elijah, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there, Elijah? What are you doing in there? I want you to think about your situation. I want you to think about the thing that you're afraid of, the thing that has you on the run, the thing that makes you want to say, oh, I've had enough, Lord. The thing that makes you want to crawl into a cave. I want you to think about your wolf, all right? I think God brought you in here today to say, what are you doing in that cave? What are you doing in there? And there's lots of different kinds of caves that we crawl into when we're afraid. Sometimes the cave that we crawl into is what I would call here, I call it kind of the cave of bitterness. The cave of bitterness. Look what Elijah says. He was in there. He says this. He says, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And basically what he's saying, listen, God, I've done all this for you. Look where it got me. I played by the rules. I did what you asked me, and now I'm out on this limb, and it's about to be taken down. And the fear from all that drives you right into the cave of bitterness. I know that there's got to be a whole bunch of us in this room who you kind of feel that way. If we're really honest, and we can be honest with this, you really do kind of feel that way towards God. Because there's some prayers that you prayed, and why didn't he answer them? At all. In fact, it felt like he almost ignored you. And I mean, and didn't we kind of have a deal? God, I mean, I'll do this, and then you do that. I'll be good, God, and then you, and I'll give you this, and then you're going to give me. And God is not keeping his end of the deal. And so we crawl into the cave of bitterness. And I'm telling you, here's the thing though. If you're going to stay there, here's the thing I got to warn you about. That cave of bitterness, here's why it's dangerous. Because when you crawl into that cave of bitterness, you start to believe lies. And the lies sound something like this. See if it sounds familiar. I am on my own. I can't trust anybody. Nobody's got my back now. I got to look out for myself. God can't even be trusted. And we get so angry that we crawl into this cave of bitterness and we don't actually realize that it's fear that's driven us there. But I think God brought you here this morning because he wants you to hear those same words. What are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? There's also another cave. There's a cave, I'd call this the kind of the cave of despair. I mean, Elijah's had enough. I mean, he doesn't have enough energy to hope, right? I mean, he's emotionally, spiritually, relationally, physically exhausted. You ever been there? I mean, where you don't even have anything inside, any part of you enough to kind of even hope anymore. And here's the thing, too. Don't feel bad. So I'll tell you, even the bravest amongst us sometimes end up feeling that way. As I was working on this talk, I came across a story from Martin Luther King Jr. It's in his book, Stride Towards Freedom. It's like a copy of 1 Kings 19 story. And here's King's own words. Let me just read this to you, okay? He says this, one night toward the end of January, I settled into my bed late after a strenuous day. Coretta had already fallen asleep, and just as I was about to doze off, the telephone rang. An angry voice said, listen. And he said, insert racial slur. Listen, we've taken all we want from you, and before next week, you're going to be sorry you ever came to Montgomery. I hung up the phone, but I couldn't sleep. It seemed that all my fears had come down on me at once, and I had reached a saturation point. So I got out of bed and began to walk the floor. I finally went to the kitchen. I heated up a pot of coffee, and I was ready to give up. With my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me, I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing like a coward. In that state of exhaustion, when my courage was all but gone, I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, and I bowed over the kitchen table, and I prayed out loud. And the words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. Here's what I said. I said, God, I'm here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. God, I'm at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. That's one of the great modern day prophets, Martin Luther King. He knew what it was like to be in this cave of despair. But I'll tell you what, if you're there too, if you crawled into that cave of despair and fear's gotten you there, hear me on this, that is a dangerous place to stay. You may go there for a moment or two, but I'm telling you, if you stay there, that is the place where you will give up. That is the place, hear me on this, that is the place where you decide, I got no real purpose for living. That's the place where you'll say, I am done trying. And I think God has brought you here today because he wants you to hear these words. Hey, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? I think there's a third cave too. It's called the cave of comfort. Now this one's a little different than the first two. The first two have a different kind of emotional intensity to it. But I think, like Elijah, I think we're tempted to think sometimes, you know what? I've done enough. I've done a lot more for God than other people. It's time for someone else to kind of stick their neck out. And let me just say this. For those of us, you're a little farther down the path of life. The older you get, the scarier it gets to take risks. Because now all of a sudden there's more at stake and there's less margin, less runway for failure. And so I think sometimes we say, hey, I've already sacrificed. I've done my part. Someone else needs to step up. And I think if we listen closely to what's going on inside of us, it's all being driven by fear. And that fear then drives us into the cave of comfort where we become very passive. Everything is self-serving. It's about taking care of me and mine, and our world gets very, very, very small. And I'm telling you, for some of you, what God wants to do, He wants to call you out of that cave of comfort, and He says, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? See, God did not want Elijah's story to end in a cave called fear, and He doesn't want any of our stories to end there either. So hear me on this today. If you're going like, yeah, I think I'm in the cave of bitterness. I'm in this cave of despair, or maybe I'm headed towards retirement. I'm planning on moving into the cave of comfort. I think God's saying, no. What are you doing here? The Martin Luther King Jr. story I shared, I stopped with those words. He said, I had nothing left. I have nothing left, he said to God. But just like Elijah, the presence of God came to him, and here's what he said. Here's the next paragraph. King's words. He said, at that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I'd never experienced him before. It seems as though I could hear the quiet assurance, again, it's like a whisper, of an inner voice saying, stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever. And he said, almost at once, my fears began to go, and my uncertainty disappeared, and I was ready to face anything. The divine presence, this assurance that God will be by my side forever. And I'll tell you what, when you know that, as you walk out those doors, and you know for sure that God will be with you no matter what, that is what changes your story, your old story into a brand new story. Because all of a sudden, your old story of fear that you came with, you leave with a brand new story of faith because you know that no matter what I'm facing, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what comes my way, that God is going to be with me. And that's a powerful thing. The prophet Isaiah, he heard God speak the same thing to him. Look what he says in Isaiah 41. And I think this is for some of you. Take this in. If you don't hear anything else, let this sink into your head and deep into your heart and just reside there. He says, do not fear, for I am with you. He's talking to you personally. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Hear that? He's with you. He'll strengthen you. He'll uphold you. And there's a new story he wants to write with your life. So what happened with Elijah when he stood at the mouth of the cave? He heard these words. The word of the Lord came to him. Next verse, it goes to verse 15. He says this. The Lord said to him, go on back. Go on back. Go back. You go back and you face that fear, but not alone. Right? The Lord's with you. You go on back and you take that risk, but you're not going to do it alone because the Lord's with you. You go on back and you fulfill the purpose, because every one of us in this room, there's a purpose that God put you on planet Earth. There's something important that you were meant to. You go on back and you fulfill that purpose, and the Lord's with you. And when you do that, I'm telling you, God will take your old story, and it'll be a brand new story. I want you to hear the new story that God's writing with my friend Emily. Listen to her story.
My name is Emily, and this is my story. First experienced God at the age of 10 when I went to a summer Bible camp. I knew at that time that God had me, and I was looking forward to going home and exploring my faith even more. And it was shortly after that my parents got divorced, which led me to a place of where my innocence was intruded on. And I was 11 and searching for answers and started down the road of darkness, which ended up being for 15 years. The 15 years of darkness ended when I met my now husband, Brian, and he introduced me to community, where I found my way back to God. It was at that same time, the age of 11, that I believe God gave me the gift of dance. And it was during that same time that I realized that dance could be an escape for me, and it could be a safe place. That's where I learned that I loved teaching. I had a mentor who took me under her wing and taught me what it was like to give someone else the gift of dance. It was in 2009 that we first started hearing God call us to Yorkville. There was something in there, I think fear, that was keeping us from really listening to God. And we were praying that God would stretch us in our generosity. And we felt like God would tell us that the way you were going to be most generous is through a performing arts center in Yorkville. It was at that time that we both really felt like now's the time to go. If I'm honest, we were scared, and people thought we were crazy. We had an 18-month-old, and I was 9 months pregnant, and we uprooted our whole family, and we were scared and we were fearful, but we came to the point where we chose. You can live two lives. You can live a life of fear, or you can live a life of faith, and we chose to dive 2 feet into faith. I absolutely feel like there were times that I was hiding. When you think about going to a new community, and yes, there is a sense of relief that you can start over, but there is also that part that you know, if you're really going to get to know people and they're going to get to know you and you're going to invest in your lives, that you're going to need to share that life, it kind of seizes you and it makes you fear. What are they going to say? Are they going to talk about me? Am I going to be accepted? That was such a huge thing for me from the time I was 11 to 26 is feeling that acceptance and wanting it and craving it and doing anything to get it, until I realized that there was only one person that I needed acceptance from, and he accepted me just the way I was. And when I came to know Jesus, I realized that, and that he would redeem my life. And in sharing what he had given me and the gifts and the talents in the center, that little girl at 11 would be redeemed through other kids, just made me feel like it would be okay.
I know Emily pretty well, and to think of her as a person of fear now, I mean, I would hardly even recognize it. She is one of the most outgoing, risk-taking, bold people that I know. And what's happened in her life is God's written a brand new story. She started a performing arts center that, where kids are discovering talents that they never knew they had before. And in the process, she's also sharing God with them. We've seen a huge increase in the number of people coming to our Yorkville campus and the number of people that are finding their way back to God and being baptized. It's like one person after another. They tell their story, and somehow it intersects, I was a part of the Yorkville Performing Arts Center. And Emily. Here's what happens. Here's the difference from the old story to the new story. And it goes back to this verse in Isaiah 41:10. He says, I'm with you, for I'm with you. That's the promise that God made to Isaiah. It's the promise also that Jesus made to his followers. Last thing he said before he left planet Earth. One more time. Hey, I'm going to be with you always. We're going to have a time of communion. And during this communion time, it's actually Jesus coming right to your very seat to be with you and to leave and to go into this world with you. And if you want that, if you want to receive that, have him go with you. You take that piece of bread and go ahead and just hold on to it. We're going to take it together as a church family a little bit.